today's video, I asked ChatGPT to tell me what it thinks are the 25 greatest WWE matches of all time. And I was very specific. I told it to only give me WWE matches. So that's what you're gonna get in this video. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, ring the bell for notifications. If you're a wrestling fan, you're gonna fall in love with this YouTube channel because we always upload daily wrestling content. And I'm on vacation right now, traveling at TwitchCon, which is why you're seeing me with the same shirt and the same look over several videos. It's not because I'm dirty, it's not because I'm not bathing, it's just because I'm bulk recording for your ass because we do daily videos here. All right, let's jump into it. Starting things off at number 25, ChatGPT has Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania 35 in 2019. ChatGPT goes on to state that this is the first ever women's main event at WrestleMania, a historic and intense match where Becky became, quote, Becky Two Belts. Although this isn't a great explanation as to why it's a great match, at the very least it does explain that this is a historic match and it is going to go down as one of the most important matches ever in the history of the WWE because it was just such a giant leap forward for women's wrestling as a whole. And on its own merit, it is objectively a very good triple threat match, albeit with a bit of a wonky finish. That being said, you know what didn't help this match? The fact that it was at the very end of a 7.5-hour WrestleMania, which meant it started after midnight Eastern time, which meant a lot of people were tired and just didn't have the energy to make this feel like the historic main event that it was. However, I've gone back to watch it after the fact, and I can still say that it is a very, very good match. At number 24, all of the fans of Golden Era professional wrestling are about to roll in their grave because it has Randy Savage versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat from WrestleMania 3 at 1987. I'm not gonna lie, I think that this is really, really low. I thought that this was gonna be significantly higher on this list, considering that this is typically in a lot of like top 10 lists as one of the greatest matches of all time. And me personally, even though I'm not a huge fan of 80s professional wrestling, I can say that that match is actually perfect. It is one of the few Golden Era matches that I personally believe holds the test of time and would be enjoyed by today's wrestling fan. It really is a fantastic match, and I think it should be higher. At number 23, I love you, ChatGPT, for including this. Sasha Banks versus Bayley at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 2015. ChatGPT goes on to say that this match set a new standard for women's wrestling in WWE and was a milestone in the women's revolution. This is entirely true. To me, this was the first like ultra uber mega classic in women's wrestling in the WWE that I'd personally ever seen. This is one of my favorite matches of all time, and I promise you it still stands the test of time as I've recently rewatched it for Patreon. Not only is the match really good, but the crowd is insane for this match, and the story leading up to this match is genuinely fantastic. I think that there's an argument to be made that in terms of women's wrestling, this might be more important in the timeline of women's wrestling than the WrestleMania 35 main event, because without this match, I don't think that the WrestleMania 35 main event happens. I personally have this match in my top 10, so for me it's a little bit low. At number 22, ChatGPT has CM Punk versus John Cena on Monday Night Raw, February 25th, 2013. And for those that don't remember, this is leading up into WrestleMania 29. So really it was to determine who goes on to go face The Rock for the WWE Championship, a WWE Championship that CM Punk had just lost to The Rock. To this day, I feel like this match should have ended in a double countout in some way to make it so that the WrestleMania 29 main event wasn't just Cena versus Rock again, that it should have been a triple threat match between Cena, Punk, and Rock. That was honestly one of the bigger mistakes that they've made in that era of WrestleManias. Punk should have been in that match. But I remember this. This was a PLE worthy classic just on Monday Night Raw. This is arguably from an in-ring perspective, maybe better than their Money in the Bank match, just not in terms of overall narrative and storytelling and stakes. And number 21, ChatGPT has Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit at the Royal Rumble in 2003. Many people will tell you that this might be the greatest technical wrestling match of all time. These guys don't throw punches. It is just graps. And if that's your style of wrestling, I wouldn't be surprised if this is actually probably in your top 5, because I do believe that from a technical wrestling point that this might be the greatest technical wrestling match of all time in WWE. Both Benoit and Angle are just masters of their craft at this point. I think if I were to give it a bit of a downer is the fact that it's one of those predictable main events. No one in their right mind thought that Benoit had a chance, especially because Kurt Angle was on his way to go face Brock Lesnar.
No. Oh,
I remember this spot.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine?
The making of a superstar right here.
Oh yeah, dude. It's
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Is this? Oh.
That, folks, was a sneak peek of this week's Wrestling is Cool Match Club, which is available exclusively on patreon.com/SantiZap. This week, we'll be doing a watch-along of the WrestleMania 32 Intercontinental Championship ladder match. The greatest squash match of all time, Shawn Michaels versus Vince McMahon in a street fight at WrestleMania 22. Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks at WrestleMania 37. The Boneyard match between AJ Styles and The Undertaker at WrestleMania 36. And one of the greatest matches of all time, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Bret the Hitman Hart at WrestleMania 13. It's a little WrestleMania week this time. You can find these alongside the Raw reviews, SmackDown reviews, and the Wrestling is Cool podcast 3 days early all over on the Patreon. Once again, that's patreon.com/SantiZap. Come on over, give it a shot for 1 month. I think that you're really gonna like the offerings there. Just give it a shot, but back to the video. And number 20, ChatGPT has Triple H versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 28. Shawn Michaels, a special guest referee in the end of an era Hell in a Cell match. This is one of my favorite matches of all time. I don't think that it's the best match of all time, but it's one of my personal favorites. One of those desert island matches that I would personally take with me. It's also one of those matches that if somebody were to ask me what match do I want to relive if I were to forget it all, it would be this one. The story, man, was just perfection. Everyone that was involved really increased the emotional feeling of this match by a factor of 10, and to me, to this day, still has the greatest kick out of all time when Taker kicked out of the Sweet Chin Music into the pedigree. This is a beautiful, amazing match, and maybe my favorite WrestleMania match of all time. At 19, ChatGPT has Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog at SummerSlam 1992. This is one of those matches that is also just a masterpiece, and it's fascinating to know that this was almost entirely carried by Bret Hart, and that should surprise absolutely no one because Bret Hart is an amazing professional wrestler and one of the best to ever be in the ropes. This is that match that gets replayed over and over and over again when they talk about SummerSlam. It still stands the test of time. It truly is a technical marvel in my opinion. At number 18, ChatGPT has Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24. We talked a little bit about an emotional height with matches, and it might not get more emotional than this one right here. Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair for really all the marbles. To retire Ric Flair is a truly fantastic match from an in-ring perspective, but more than anything, it is a match that absolutely manipulates you from an emotional standpoint to get to the edge of borderline, if not actually crying. The message of "I'm sorry, I love you," followed by that super kick and the end of Ric Flair's career for the first of many times, is still going to stick with me. It is just such a fantastic match, but more than anything, it is the blueprint of emotional storytelling. Number 17 is a bit of a hidden gem in my opinion. ChatGPT has The Shield versus the Wyatt family at Elimination Chamber 2014. I've had the pleasure to recently rewatch this again on the Patreon. Go check it out. We watch a lot of awesome matches over there, and this match fucking rules. This was The Shield working at its absolute best. Every single strength of each of the individuals on the Shield was highlighted tenfold by how good the Wyatt family is at getting the best out of the guys from the Shield. It sounds like it's carried by the Shield, and maybe to a degree they do all of the best spots, but the Wyatt family, Luke Harper especially, and also Bray Wyatt, absolutely crush it in this match. The crowd is going apeshit for this match. This match should have been at WrestleMania in my opinion, which was just a month later. At number 16, ChatGPT has The Rock versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18. This match rules. This is one of my favorite matches of all time, and this is one of those matches that just proves that storytelling and the crowd atmosphere is the most important thing in a professional wrestling match. That what happens technically in the ring is important, but my goodness, like, this match is not a technical marvel by any means. Hulk Hogan is a very limited in-ring performer, but the narrative that these two were telling, the storytelling, the physical and emotional storytelling that these guys go through during this match, and seeing pretty much a double turn happen in front of our eyes because the crowd just said, Hogan, you're just a babyface, and we're gonna root for you whether you want us to or not, and we're gonna boo The Rock. It was a beautiful, chaotic event to see the crowd go through these emotions where nostalgia just absolutely took over. Hulkamania was running wild in Toronto that night. At number 15, ChatGPT has one of my personal favorites, AJ Styles versus John Cena at SummerSlam 2016. I know that there are people that think that the Royal Rumble match is better. Honestly, to me, it's take it or leave it. It's one or the other. They're both amazing matches. I know that number 16 for John Cena's championship reigns happens at the Royal Rumble, so you might hold it in a higher esteem because of the historical significance of that match. But to me, I agree with ChatGPT. I think it's the better of the two matches and one of the best matches in the modern era of professional wrestling. And a quick reminder that John Cena consistently gives these amazing wrestlers their best match in the WWE, because it takes two to tango. So don't tell me that John Cena can't wrestle. At number 14, ChatGPT has Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, the Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12. And that shouldn't surprise anybody. Bret Hart, one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time. Shawn Michaels, Mr. WrestleMania, at a WrestleMania in a 1-hour Iron Man match that ends up tied and goes to overtime. Like, dude, like, give me that. Give me more of that. This is a match that is consistently in people's top 10s, maybe even top 5. So I think that some people would consider this to be fairly low on the list at number 12. Number 14, got that wrong. This is number 14. And number 13, ChatGPT has Daniel Bryan versus Batista versus Randy Orton at WrestleMania 30. This is, of course, the culmination of the Yes movement, but I gotta disagree here. In terms of an emotional match, it's definitely up there because it's the culmination of one of the greatest stories and greatest underdog tales that the WWE has ever told. But let me tell you a little bit of a secret, okay? Triple H versus Daniel Bryan, that very same night, earlier in the night, is better than this in terms of a wrestling match, in my opinion. Obviously, this is the match that we all remember and that we all connect to WrestleMania 30 and Daniel Bryan's career, but there was a better match earlier on in the night, in my opinion. I don't know that this would be in my top 25 should I make one, but I wouldn't necessarily bat an eye if it's on yours because it is a really, really popular match and one of, like I said, the most emotional matches in the history of the WWE, but again, just not necessarily in my list. At number 12, ChatGPT has Shawn Michaels versus Triple H at SummerSlam 2002. And this was my first ever favorite wrestling match of all time. I started watching wrestling a couple of months before this, so this is like a childhood core memory for me. I asked my parents to get me SummerSlam 2002 as an early birthday gift just for this match predominantly. The match is insane. This unsanctioned match is so brutal, so violent, and it's one of those matches that just grips you from an emotional perspective because it's two best friends coming to blows. And the ending is something that I'll always remember. Shawn Michaels picking up the victory with a roll-up, but then Triple H getting the last laugh by trying to break Shawn Michaels' back again. Oh yeah, I think it's important to note that this is Shawn Michaels' return from his severe back injury. He hadn't had a full match in about 4 years at this point. And that was a lot of the narrative. Can Shawn Michaels still go? And to me, that wasn't a narrative that I cared about when I was a kid because I hadn't seen Shawn Michaels before. To me, he was a brand new WWE superstar, but let me spoil it for you. He absolutely could still freaking go. At number 11, ChatGPT has Bret Hart versus Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10. It's funny because this is a WrestleMania that Bret Hart has multiple matches, kind of like Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30, but unlike Daniel Bryan Brian, it actually recognizes the match earlier on in the night, not the main event, as Brett's better match on that night, and I entirely agree. You want to watch like a clinic of professional wrestling? Like, this is it. We talked about older matches that still stand the test of time, and I promise you that this is one of them. If you're a wrestling fan, I feel like you need to watch this match, more so, of course, to be entertained, but just to study and see just how good these two are and how wrestling has progressed since. And number 10, ChatGPT has Edge and Christian versus the Dudley Boys versus the Hardys at WrestleMania 17 in a TLC match. Turns out ChatGPT is a bit of a basic bitch, because I have this match in my top 10. I think you watching this probably have this match in your top 10, because it's one of the most entertaining, chaotic car crashes that you could watch. But not only is it a chaotic car crash, it's a chaotic car crash happening on the biggest stage imaginable in a tag team match that has three of the greatest tag teams, if not the three greatest tag teams in the history of this sport. So yeah, ChatGPT, I'm a basic bitch too. I would have this on my list as well. At number 9, we have Triple H's coming of age tale. Triple H versus Cactus Jack at the Royal Rumble 2000 in a street fight. I think some people might want to put the Hell in a Cell match higher, but I think personally ChatGPT is right. This is the better one. It's funny because there are so many megastars that needed to go through Mick Foley in some sort of a hellish car crash to really be a man in the WWE, to really reach that next gear. And after this feud with Mick Foley, Triple H did just that. And that's exactly what Randy Orton did after Backlash 2004. That's exactly what Edge did after WrestleMania 22. And it happened with Triple H as well. This is an awesome, chaotic, brutal, bloody affair. Turns out that ChatGPT just likes gratuitous violence, it seems. At number 8, ChatGPT has The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 26. So ChatGPT went with the sequel at this spot. I'm sure that we're probably going to see the original from WrestleMania 25 later on in this list. And I do believe that this match, for some reason, just doesn't get as much love and praise as the WrestleMania 25 match, because it's really freaking good and the stakes are technically higher than the WrestleMania 25 match. I feel like what maybe has this a bit lower on people's list is the fact that we were kind of expecting this match to be amazing, and it was amazing. Meanwhile, with the WrestleMania 25 match, we were expecting great, but what we got was maybe the greatest wrestling match of all time. But yeah, of course, ChatGPT, I'm glad that you have this on your list, because weirdly, a lot of people don't. At number 7, I feel like you're going to see Shawn Michaels a few times here. You have Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 21. The match that everyone and their dog agrees is a 5-star match, except that Dave Meltzer guy, which is why I just don't give a shit about what he says, because he's just wrong, okay? This is a perfect wrestling match in the biggest stage imaginable between the two greatest professional wrestlers, in my opinion, at that moment in time. The counters in this match are incredible. You have an ankle lock in here that seems to be the most painful, most agonizing thing that Shawn Michaels has ever been through, because the man is just a master of selling both physically and emotionally. And it was a simple story. There's nothing at stake. It's just who's the real Mr. WrestleMania? Who is the better man between Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle? You don't need to overcomplicate things, and when you don't overcomplicate it, when you already got two of the greatest of all time, you just get magic. At number 6, ChatGPT has The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 17. Although this match to this day still has an ending that I personally don't like. I don't like Vince McMahon going out there, inserting himself in this match when the match was already perfect and amazing. It's still ridiculously high on people's lists and on my list as well. This is the best Austin Rock match, which goes a long way considering they are the two biggest stars in the WWE at the time, and they had a handful of amazing matches in their resume against each other already. I think part of what makes this match just stand the test of time is just how good WWE did at building this match and making you understand that this is one of the biggest matches for both of these guys' career at the time. And let's not forget, it's my way or the highway. Still one of the greatest video hype packages of all time. And number 5, ChatGPT has John Cena versus CM Punk again from Money in the Bank 2011. And this is a top 5 match for me. This is a match that borderline saved professional wrestling for me because it was just so goddamn good. The story going into it was what I thought at the time one of the best stories that I've ever seen since watching professional wrestling ever. I was gripped by the tale that was being told by CM Punk. I believed his anger. I believed that he was justified in feeling the way that he was feeling, and he was going up against the franchise, the guy that felt disenfranchised going up against the franchise. It's a beautiful, beautiful tale. But then the match itself is fantastic. That Chicago crowd on that particular night might be one of the greatest professional wrestling crowds for a single match ever in the history of the sport. And let's not forget the ending, CM Punk winning, running out through the arena with the WWE Championship, blowing Vince McMahon that kiss, a picture that will never ever be forgotten. At number 4, ChatGPT has The Undertaker versus Mankind at King of the Ring 1998 in that uber violent Hell in a Cell match. Yes, this is that Hell in a Cell where Mick Foley gets tossed off the top of the cell through the Spanish announce table. This is the very same Hell in a Cell match where Mick Foley accidentally goes through the entire cage and lands incredibly stiff on top of a chair. This is one of the most, if not the most violent match in the history of the WWE specifically. So this goes with what I said. I think ChatGPT is a bit of a sadomasochist here. It loves its violence. I don't think that I would personally have this high. Like, to me, this was just maybe the most violent, most over-the-top squash match of all time because Mick Foley gets little to no offense in this. It is just Undertaker killing poor Mick Foley, Mankind. But I get it. I mean, I understand the love and adoration for it. It's just not one that I have that high. And number 3, we have Shawn Michaels. Once again, it is Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10 in a ladder match. It's funny because this is so early on in the history of ladder matches that you would think that this would just by default not be very good or very creative with how they use the ladder. But interestingly enough, when I recently watched this match, their creativity with the ladder, I think is more creative with how they use ladders today. And I think it's because there really wasn't a blueprint as to how to have a good ladder match. These guys were just sort of making it on the fly, thinking, all right, maybe this shit will look cool, and it did. This is one of those matches that still stands the test of time, and I think will forever stand the test of time as a fantastic match. And number 2, ChatGPT has Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in a submission match at WrestleMania 13. And I rewatched this match literally last week for the Patreon, and I can tell you with confidence that in this rewatch, it's become maybe one of my favorite matches of all time. I think that this is actually a perfect match from a technical point of view. Obviously, Bret Hart is amazing. This is a Stone Cold Steve Austin before his neck injury, so he's out there being a technical wrestler, doing suplexes, stuff that you don't really get to see him do when he comes back from this brutal neck injury that he suffers just a few months after this. And the match is violent too. A lot of people forget about that. You have them fighting right beside the fans. They're using weapons. They're using cables to choke each other. Bret Hart at one point uses the bell to literally ring Stone Cold Steve Austin's bell. And of course, this match is known for that famous moment where Bret Hart cinches in one of the nastiest looking sharpshooters that you can think of as Stone Cold is bleeding with that crimson mask, as Ken Shamrock is asking Stone Cold if he wants to quit. But instead of quitting, Stone Cold passes out after being in the sharpshooter for what felt like 5 minutes in a moment that was seen by so many fans as one of the most badass things that a guy could do, to not quit and to pass out instead, that it forced the double turn. Everyone fell in love with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Everyone hated Bret Hart. And we witnessed live on TV the most famous double turn in the history of this sport. And at number 1, I feel like you kinda sniffed this one out. It's The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25. A match that we all went in with high expectations, but somehow they took those ridiculously high expectations and fucking went right through the moon with it. It's funny because the WrestleMania 26 match has the bigger stakes, right? It's career versus streak, but this was just Shawn Michaels wanting to prove that he is better than The Undertaker and he can be the one to beat the streak. It was kind of like Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels, where really it was just two legends of this industry trying to be the better wrestler of the two. Who was the better man that night? And to me, it didn't need to be more complex than that to give us the greatest wrestling match of all time. This is likely in my number 1, at the very least in my top 3. All right, folks, thank you so much for watching this video. That's it. I'm done. Get out of here.